Hi, my name is Morgan Culberson. This is for English 463 Language Structure and Acquisition with Dr. Schneider. I'm going to be going over Noam Chomsky's theory of the universal grammar. So, during the beginning of the 20th century, first language acquisition or primary language acquisition was understood to be like any other learning process. So, in essence, it was through a succession of trial and error. And so, basically, that means that they believe that a child would um, use a certain structure of language and then be corrected by the parent. And so, they wouldn't use that anymore. Noam Chomsky challenged this view in the 1960s, and he really was the leading linguist in research surrounding universal grammar. He basically said that this perception, which was kind of the common acceptance among linguists and psychologists, of how we learn language can't be accurate because we produce new sentences every day. The sentence that I'm forming right now, that I'm speaking right now, is something that I've never said before. And this kind of organic and fluid way that language is used means that it can't be just a trained response to a stimuli. He also came up with the idea of generative grammar, which is kind of a response to this idea that language is fluid. So a really good example of this, a good modern example, is Elements of Eloquence by Mark Forsyth. It was published in 2013. So what he did is he asked people to describe the word knife using the following adjectives. So you don't have to put it in a sentence, but just use a phrase. So the little rectangular green silver knife, whatever. So if I would recommend you pausing this video, this presentation, and try and do it on your own and see how close you get it. Because he basically argued that we have this innate structure of how these things work. And I think it's just a really good, tangible example of this idea of generative grammar. So this is what Forsyth shows we generally put. This is the correct order that we generally use in English. So the lovely little old rectangular green French silver whittling knife. Obviously, this isn't an accurate example for something that we would, read in a book or something like that, but it gives a good example of how we have this innate grammar that we don't really think about, we just kind of know. So when given this list of adjectives, native English speakers will almost always put the adjectives in this correct order. So it starts with opinion, size, age, shape, color, origin, material, and then purpose. If you say in a different order, it doesn't make any sense, like this. The rectangular old whittling French green silver old lovely knife. And I just realized that I have old in there twice. But either way, it just sounds a little bit odd. It doesn't really make any sense. Even though it's all the same words, it doesn't really fit in that order. So this is a very recent example of generative grammar. So Chomsky argued that it's because of this generative grammar that language cannot be just a response to stimuli. Children encounter and respond to new sentences every day. They form new sentences every day. Using this unconscious understanding of grammar that isn't written down in any textbook. It's not something that we learn. We just know it. It sounds right that way. So this is really the basis for his poverty of stimulus argument. In short, this poverty of stimulus theory was that children acquiring their first language can master complex language because their brains have a predisposition for a certain structure of language. Excuse me. The problem that other linguists had with this was that in order for this theory to be true, that means that every language, all 6,500 of them or so, would have to have similar structures of language. And as it turns out, this is pretty much true. So generative linguists, which are just kind of linguists that support Chomsky's theory, have found that languages do share specific rules regarding syntax, even if they have different grammars. It's important to recognize that this syntactical structure that we're talking about has nothing to do with the meaning of a sentence. So for example, look at these two sentences. Robert books read the doesn't really make any sense grammatically, but we can kind of understand based on the words that are there what the meaning is supposed to be. And my guess is that you could rearrange those words to fit the proper grammatical structure. The next sentence, colorless green ideas sleep furiously. This is grammatically correct. However, the meaning of the sentence is complete nonsense and there's no meaning there at all. So this is just a really clear example of how the syntax rules are common across languages. How the syntax rules that are common across languages they don't have anything to do with the meaning. And I should point out that these examples of sentences that I use are from one of my sources. I didn't come up with them on my own. So support for Chomsky's theory of language. Up until he began purporting this theory in the 1960s, common thought in linguistics and psychology and other cognitive sciences was that when humans are born, their mind is a blank slate. But after Chomsky began developing this theory, research in other fields started coming out with results that supported this idea of universal grammar. Psychological studies found, for example, that newborn babies that are just a few days old can distinguish between different phonemes, and that they process the sound of human voices differently than they do other sounds. So there's kind of this innate mechanism that that processes human voice over other sounds. Another concept that supports this theory is that during the slave era, slaves were brought back from many, many different countries, and so they didn't speak the same language. They developed a form of communication that's generally referred to as pidgin languages, which have hardly any grammar at all. But the slaves' children, when they got to the age that they would generally acquire knowledge, actually began forming their own grammatical structure within that pidgin language. So this newly developed language eventually became known as Creole languages. And then in addition to these two, there's just the knowledge that children develop language in the same way, no matter where they're born or what language they learn to speak. There are certain ages that there are kind of marks that need to be met and are expected to be met. And if those marks don't happen, then we start looking at some developmental disabilities. So that's just kind of a brief overview of Chomsky's theory of the universal language, the universal grammar. These are a couple sources that I used. The top one specifically has a lot of really good information if you want to look further into it. Thank you so much for watching.